So we'll be going live. Hey everyone. So like I was saying in the chat, if you're following us there, today's been a little bit of a weird day. The game design team was kind of busy, so we weren't able to all get together. Luckily, and I'm very grateful for it, Alex is joining us today. So hey Alex.
Hello.
Awesome. So we're gonna jump into just it's just gonna be a casual conversation. I don't know what we'll talk about in particular. Andrew has some questions about marketing that he wants me to kind of go over, and we could just talk about different gaming experiences or other things. If you have questions you want to kind of ask me, we can go through that as well. But
Well,
before,
my
pardon?
questions. Does Core care about clothing? What type of food do they eat? It's gonna be weird.
Yeah, I'm game. We'll do that. So before we jump into that, let me throw up some announcements. So the first big thing that I always want to go over is a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters. So thank you to everyone who's helped us get through 2020. It was a very difficult year, and it's not like this year has started off particularly strong either. But I appreciate everyone's support along the way. Thank you to Andrew, Gunther, Hill, Steven, Stevo, and Will for being huge supports every step of the way. So thank you so much. If you sign up by before the end of this month, your Patreon package is going to include that full art borderless instill vigor and the foil Kun. And then on the other side, I want to give a really big shout out to the Future Leaguers. The more and more I think about it, the more appreciative I am for everything that the Future League community has done for us. So thank you to everyone on every platform who helps support the game, helps things grow, and helps lead particular initiatives. The other thing today at 7 p.m., I'm going to be doing Future League testing. Alex, are you going to be able to join for that?
I should be there. It might be a few minutes late, but otherwise I'll be there.
Nice. So tonight we're going to be going over. It's our last chance to do some deck tests before the tournament tomorrow. So if you are free, or if you just want to watch, that's always also available for you there. Speaking of the tournament, where is that? Let me put that on the screen. So tomorrow is our first Future League focus tournament. It's not our third tabletop simulator tournament. First place is gonna get a booster box. Everyone's gonna get that reverse art stone protector. So if you're interested in coming out to the tournament, make sure you register because that's happening tomorrow at 2 p.m. And then what other announcements do I have? We got our town hall happening on February 1st, and I think that's everything. So let's jump into some of these topics, and let me pull up Tabletop Simulator so at least there's something on screen that's happening. Alex, would you want to join me for a server?
I'm not, unfortunately, at any computer that has tabletop on it.
Okay, fair
I'm in
enough.
the room at the store.
I'm just gonna be playing around with some cards as questions kind of come my way. So feel free to launch questions. Like I said, this one's gonna be a little bit more open ended. I'm gonna start with some of the questions in chat, and then we'll move into some of the ones that Alex you may have on your mind about random world building questions. So Andrew, you're asking what is our business plan for marketing and demographics? So big thing to recognize, before starting this company I had no experience in marketing, and I'm not someone who's gonna say with any level of confidence that I know how marketing is approached, because I don't. It's something that a lot of people specialize in, and I gotta give credit where credit's due. Marketing experts are amazing at what they do, and I worked with a few of them when it came to Genesis. uh, it's not something that I can just assume I know how to do. I am trying my best. So when it comes to demographics, we put it out there with the assumption that we were going to hit younger audiences. We were going to hit people in their teens who are really interested in gaming. But that was our assumption. The reality was we found a lot more players in their late 20s, early 30s, even into the 40s who are really into Genesis. And now again, here's one of my assumptions, and maybe Alex you could talk about this, but a lot of times we're finding people who have played card games for a while and are looking at the next steps when it comes to gaming, because Genesis is very unique and comes with different strategies. So, Alex, maybe talk about, and I know we've talked about this a lot in the past, but given your experience of gaming, what is it that draws you into Genesis?
So I agree 100% with your statement there. So for me myself, I have been playing Magic since I was 4 or 5, and I've wanted something else. It's gotten, let's say, stagnant. It's in the same thing over and over again. The games, the 1v1s are kind of rough. It's not exciting me anymore. And then Genesis came along, and there's this huge extra dynamic, all these other thoughts you need to think about, and I just loved it.
Yeah. And like still it is an assumption, but I think that's the story I'm hearing a lot is especially people who've been playing Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, or any of these games that's been around since either like Magic's been around since 93, Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon came out in the early 2000s, and they've been playing those games for a very long time. They're now looking at the landscape of the game and being like, okay, I gotta just do something different. It has to be a new level of challenge. And all of a sudden, when you're playing a game where, uh, even now, some of the most like Alex, you make this great point where some of your favorite cards are the 3 chi, 2 attack, 1 health creatures, which is so different than any other game because in here you need to have a good 3 chi that you play well with. So I think the fact that there is that dimension, it's there's more to think of than just what's the best card, what's the best combo. It's how do I play well as well. Um, so that's part of like why my sense of the demographic changed over time. What marketing materials and displays could be used to boost player outside of the game shop regulars to encourage taking up the game and growing the community outside word of mouth. So I think one of the big values we have right now is that we are still at the word of mouth level, and it allows us to. It does slow the way we grow, which is true, but at the same time, it allows us to grow more organically. We're not pressured by outside forces to grow in a particular way. We can leverage the community, have these conversations. I talk with Alex on a very regular basis about, you know, from a player's perspective, how would he like to see the game change? And I am constantly listening on Discord about how does the community want to see the game change? How do they want to see the next steps be? So I think it's great having this opportunity right now to grow slow and steady. But when it comes to doing that large expanse growth, we are talking to the art team. We have a lot of our artists who work on this project. Part of the reason why they work on this project, so let me find an example of this. Part of the reason they work on this project is because it gives them an opportunity to do something that normally they would not be allowed to get paid for because they're not specialized in that or they're not particularly strong with it. So if we take this example of the behemoth here that I have up on screen, this card, Damian got to do this artwork in a 3D rendering where he hadn't, up to this point, never hadn't been employed to do any 3D rendering. So he can never explore this tool and still get paid for his work. So some of our artists right now are exploring different mediums, like the intro screen that we just ran at the beginning of this video. The artist behind that is Mikhail, who's done a lot of amazing artwork. He's trying to practice more at making these 3D videos. So we're giving him assignments now that he can do that. So we are slowly ramping up on different ways that we can grow, and especially since we're now starting to get some good growth in the States. There are several stores in Florida that are interested in the game. We also recently partnered with a store in Tucson, Arizona, and they're hosting their first tournament this Sunday, which is kind of cool. They're doing a sealed tournament. So we're working with the stores, we're working with the community, and we're just finding that right time to see that large growth. And right now, because of COVID, it's hard to make any big steps without it feeling like a huge risk. So that's how I kind of look at marketing, it's a constant back and forth. There is no right time, right answer to anything. All right, I think that's all that's in the chat. So for people who are just joining, today's kind of a weird day where we don't have the game design team with us. So if you have questions you want to ask, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll get to them. But we do have Alex here. And Alex, if you want to ask any particular questions, any of those oddball things that maybe I never thought of, go for it.
All right. Still, it's weird question number one. So we've seen Ajna and Vadhis be allies, as far as I believe, from one of our previous stories. But how does trade work in Jalara? Are all the cities trading with each other? I'm assuming Vishud's probably not trading with a bunch of them. But what about other?
So I wish I had a map of the world on screen that I could show. Actually, maybe I can find the artwork and put that up on screen. So give me a second here to pull up the map for people who don't know all the cities. Genesis art map. All right. And of course, it's gonna be an interesting question. To be honest, a lot of these times when you ask these questions, it is just trying to use logic to figure out, okay, what makes sense. So let's put this up on screen. So for people who are listening on screen, you can now see the map of Jalara, at least the parts that we've ventured to so far. On the west side, you have Vishud, who lives in this desert area. Vadhis is more central, right beside the River Nai. It was the second city to get populated. Then in the south, you have Sahas. This was a lot of people from Vadhis had left that city to establish their own place. They went to Sahas, and they're now living out of an abandoned library that the demons had put there originally. And then some of those people from Sahas wanted to go back to Vadhis and ended up on the other side of River Nai and settled at the base of the two mountains, which now created Ajna. So where we are at in the story, it's actually one of the few times where people, people from Ajna have traveled to Vadhis. Now, when it comes to trade, I could imagine a trade happening between Vadhis and Ajna, especially if they have the boats to travel across. But Sahas doesn't have much to trade for, nor do they want anything more than what they have inside their space. And Vishud, the only people they could possibly trade with is Vadhis because they're close, but they're enemies. So I don't know if trade would even happen between those two cities. So I could imagine trade between Vadhis and Ajna. I can also imagine that Ajna's currency is based off of Vadhis's currency. Because again, the people from Ajna were people who left to Vadhis, did not like what was happening in Sahas, and wanted to go back, but ended up in the wrong location. So Ajna, in a lot of ways, is a sister city of Vadhis.
Fair enough. So the Ajna people left Sahas. So how do they feel about Sahas? Are they like against what's going on there specifically?
So at the end of the day, the story arc that we're following with these four tribes are really about emotion versus intelligence, Axon versus Thymos, because Vishud and Vadhis are arch enemies because they don't share any affiliations together. The idea of Bellum and Chaos, it's not about Axon and Thymos. It's definitely about Bellum and Chaos because Sahas and Vishud have that one affiliation in common, where Vadhis and Ajna have Bellum in common. So for the idea of structure and order, you see that separation there between Vishud and Vadhis. Sahas and Ajna, they differ in this idea of structure and free will. So for Ajna people, they believe that there is a hierarchy, there is a way to live your life. Where the Sahas people are like, no, it's all about yourself's gratitude, doing what you think is right for yourself. And then there's a separation also on emotion versus intelligence, where the people of Sahas would very much feel that everything you need to do is driven by an intellect. And if you do things that are driven by emotion, you're giving into the weaker side of yourself. Where the Ajna people are all about driving, making decisions driven on emotion. So if you, you got to make sure that, how do I kind of put it? Like the Ajahn people are about balance and order, but balance within emotion and spirituality, where the Sahas people are about intellect and freedom and breaking the rules, and that's where they would differ a lot. So, long-winded way, and I like doing long-winded answers, so I'm sorry about that. But yes, Sahas and Ajna would not get along the same way that Vishud and Vadhis wouldn't get along. But at the same time, any of the two cities with an overlapping affiliation would have some common level to talk about. But since these two sets, Welcome to Jilar and Rays, are very driven of the conversation of Bellum versus Chaos, it's even if Sahas and Vadhis have Axon in common, they still differentiate on Bellum and Chaos, and that's why they're not allies. All right, there's some stuff that's coming in from the chat. So what's north of the mountains? More stuff. There is ideas of what we want to do, and I've spoiled it a lot. Origins is going to be the exploration of what happens on the north of the mountain, so you have to wait until Origins to see what's up there. So Ajahn could probably divert the river below them and deprive Sahas of fresh water. They could, but they're not greedy like that. They would, because of the fact that they are so emotionally driven, and they're also, so one of the elements of, or separating factors of Sahas versus Ajna is the philosophical debate of the self versus the other. So Sahas is a very selfish affiliation. I mean, not Sahas. Axon and Chaos, both very selfish affiliations. They want to do what's best in their best interest. So Sahas was over where Ajna is. They might do that if it means that they could be more empowered from the action. But both Bellum and Thymos are very much about others, and they would do actions that are trying to support other people. We see this even in the abilities that are played, where Erica brings out Baihu's, she wants to bring out more companions. Fong's ability is about preventing damage, and Long's is about healing. All these abilities have this aspect of doing something to benefit someone else. It's not about greediness for oneself. But if you look at the Sahas champions, core is you eat a summon, you gain resources. Kendra is you harm your opponent and you harm them again, right? You double down on the pain, kick them when they're down. And Rain is where do I seek the best opportunity to do the most destruction, right? Does she want to teleport in to do a lot of damage or teleport out when she's in a risky situation? It's about herself. So if she's in the middle of combat and all her summons are dying around her, she's going to get out of there. She's not going to find a way to save her summons. So that selfishness, it really shows in that ways. And because of that, I don't think Ajna would look at trying to harm anyone else. All right. Alex, do you have another one for me?
Yes, I do. When someone becomes a champion, finds their conduit, do other champions immediately know or are able to sense that that person is a champion just by being around them?
So looking into the stories so far, champions, I'm trying to think of where we're at in the storyline, or where we're also driving towards. I know I have this fight scene that comes up between Raha and Rain, and the moment the conduit's revealed, then Raha knows that something's up, that Rain's more than what she appears. I don't think that there's this exact sense. I don't even think the champions in the world know this concept that they are champions per se, that they are higher beings. They just feel more powerful. And so it's not like this moment between going from Clark Kent to Superman. It's more of a transitional thing, like going from young Bruce Wayne to adult Bruce Wayne. Like you had to train and grow. You just became better than everyone else. So I think there's more of that kind of sense between the characters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
All right. What do you have next?
I'll go for a weirder one since we're just as you brought it up. So you said they do have boats, because they Ashna and should could trade, or Vadis could trade.
Yeah.
Technologically wise, how far are they on the boat scale? Do they go out to the ocean to the south, that type of stuff, for fishing?
So when you're looking at that, so Vadhis and Ajna are the most, well, more than anything, Vadhis is the most technologically driven. Sahas is the most intellectually driven. Their science and their medicine is way beyond anyone else's. But again, they're so selfish that it's really about how do I take care of myself. Vadhis, since they have that Bellum aspect to them, there is a greediness to them, but there's also a community growth aspect to them. So that's why when we go from Vishud's weapons, so if we look at the weapons for the Vishud champions, you have Idris, who, not in that artwork. Where's the other artwork of Idris? Here it is. Idris has a staff that you can see just behind her back. It's a white staff. Malik has a staff and claws, and Odara has a whip. These are all very primitive weapons, where once you start going into Vadhis, you have the bow and arrow, which is definitely much more advanced. And same with Khan spear and shield. These are actually metal crafted weapons. And then when you go back to Sahas, you have Kendra. She has a book. Rain has her size. That's a little bit different. And Rain's story arc, being a soldier from the initial war of demons versus elves, puts her background way back there. And then Kor, he's just fighting with his fists. Like there's no weapon in his image. So, and then Ajna, you have the spear and you have the sword. But you'll see about those. Those are an interesting story arc. So coming back to technology, Vadhis definitely has a lot more technology and would be willing to push the boundaries. But since they would have to go more or less not through Sahas territory, but near Sahas territory to go fishing in the south, that's a little bit more risky. Especially since once the war starts and the king starts implementing some attacks towards the south, they sever their ties. So it is now entering enemy territory. So maybe when things were a little bit more peaceful, you could see something like that, but you wouldn't be going there now that Welcome to Jaelara has started. And then the area of water completely south of Vadhis, where it's a little bit dark and the ground's fractured, that is actually swamp area. So it's not going to be ideal for fishing. What's the Highlander effect? So Steven's asking, is it more like the Highlander effect? I don't know what that is. Like Highlander.
So the I actually myself though haven't watched Highlander itself, but I know like all the people who are a Highlander, they have to fight all the Highlander people to gain power. Essentially, like the phrase is there can only be one.
Yeah, there was wasn't there a Bruce Lee movie like that? The one where he went and killed himself in multiple dimensions to make himself stronger. But tying that into Genesis, there's no sense of that directly, but there is this idea that, like for Nubia, actually, here's a good telltale sign about this. So Nubia, if you've read the chapters for the Akashic Codex so far, she's been able to live in the king's court without the king noticing that she's a champion. And so you have the entire story arc where King Emmett uh, Alex, you've read the chapters. We've done the one where King Emmett has a conversation with her in the cathedrals, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I read it.
So in that conversation, the king keeps on forgetting that she's blind, keeps on underestimating her power, doesn't even think that she's capable of harming an angel. So she's hiding all of her powers from the king. Rain is able to trigger, not Rain, Raha is able to trigger into this because Nubia does the telepathy conversation with her. But at the same time, she doesn't even know the depths of Nubia's powers. So there is this ability to conceal it. It comes down to, like, there's a sense that these people are stronger. There's a connection, but it's not to the point where you're like, oh, we're on a whole new league of characters than anyone else. So Stephen, correcting, when you become a Highlander, you can sense other Highlanders when they are near. And so, sorry, yeah, you can. I think, like, if a champion wants to hide their powers, they probably could, and they could probably get away with it with no one noticing. Uh, but there might be like a twinge or something where, like, if Raha's there and she sees like a scan of people and notices one person, she'd be like, something's off about that person, but not necessarily know why. And then the other thing that champions are doing, which other people are not doing, which is harvesting aura. They can come into a battle carrying aura with them, where other characters, like, we'll see that magic does play a role for the rest of the people in Jalara, but no one else can harvest aura and carry as much of it as the champions can. Yeah, Shahan, you can ask any questions you want. Basically, what's happening is that the game design team wasn't able to join me today, which is very unfortunate. So we weren't able to get to our scheduled topic. I wanted to go over some of our best questions, our best moments in Genesis gameplay, because I recently had someone ask me that, and it was a lot of fun. So I thought I would put the game designers on the spot to do that, but they weren't able to join me today. So we're just kind of going through everything, and Alex is here to ask some more bizarre questions, because I know you're ramping up to put together a D&D campaign using the Genesis lore, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's why you're asking all these weird questions, which I'm enjoying. All right, we don't have any other ones in the chat. If you have another one, feel free to throw them at me.
Okay, we'll go for your own personal opinion of our current champions. Is there who is your least favorite champion, and who is your least favorite champion storyline?
Least favorite champion. So, like, overall least favorite, like, so gameplay wise, Fong is the one that I resonate the least with. But storyline wise, I understand her and I get what her driving factor is. I don't know, because a lot of the characters who I originally didn't have a really strong resonance with when it came to their story arc, they're starting to grow on me a little bit more because there's more factors. Like Idris's original story of being this mother who lost her children and then went to Vishud, was driven out of her city into Vishud. It's actually based off of, if you read the book The Chrysalids, it was a similar factor that happened to those kids, but they were kids, so they didn't have the emotional trauma of losing children. So originally, the initial storyline for Idris was a little bit on the weaker side, but then what I saw she was evolving towards and what her future story has, I'm actually really, really hyped for that. I kind of think Malik has one of the weakest stories, and he doesn't have a lot of, like, he's very important in the lore because he does drive. He is the protector of Vishud. He drives their mentality and their philosophy. And he had his father taken away from him really young, and he is doing what he can do best. He wasn't ready for this role, and he's stepping up to it. But at the same time, like, I don't resonate with that role. I'm not the oldest child. I don't know what it's like to become the patriarch of a family or to take care of a tribe. Like, I don't resonate with that story as much, but I could definitely. And then for me personally, like, I had the very unfortunate moment in my life where I lost my mother, so I understand that feeling. But I'm very grateful that I still have my father, so I don't know that emotional side of it either. So Malik is probably, when it comes to the storyline, the one, not that I dislike him, but that I resonate the least with him.
That's fair. Who do you resonate the most with? And in the chat, tell us who you resonate the most with, champion wise.
Both gameplay and flavor wise. Who do I resonate the most with? Oh, that's interesting. So none of the Vishud ones. I think when it comes to the story, the one who I'd kind of resonate the most with is between Long and Erica. So Erica's story, very briefly, is that she's only 8, right? So she lost her parents already, and she is originally from Sahas. So she's living in Sahas. She loses her parents. Kendra is looking for someone to help boost her strength to see if they can finally bridge the gap between life and death, if they can actually resurrect someone. So Kendra takes Erica as a protege, and Erica is the one who ends up pushing things forward and resurrects Kor, resurrects Kor. And when she realizes what Kendra's trying to do, again, Sahas being a very selfish tribe, she leaves and she goes to find her, find solace, find happiness somewhere. And she's exploring, she's left Sahas, she's heading north, and this spirit animal contacts her and ends up it's saving her. Like, it asks her, if you welcome me into your soul, I will save you and I'll bring you towards protection. So the spirit animal saves her, takes over her body and brings her to Ajna, where Fong Along take her in and care for her. And the reason why I resonate is that sense of loneliness, being this little kid and having all this pressure being put on you. So my family was great. I don't want to say that there was any trauma there. My mom was amazing. My dad's amazing. My brothers are all amazing. Freed's a little bit, but I still love him with all my heart. There was this pressure because my brother, who's right above me, Wasim, he's a protege in so many ways, being the best developer I've ever met. And I spent my entire life, when it comes to computer science and coding, I spent my entire life in there up until starting this company. So with Erica, I get that idea of the pressure of trying to match someone's strength, and then that loneliness when you're trying to do so much to do it, and you end up, you make your own achievement, but you're still kind of alone in the process. So that's one side of it. And Long's sense of always protecting family, always willing to sacrifice himself, because he took on the curse of the dragon's blood to save Fong. And I know in my life, I've taken on a lot of emotional burden in a pursuit to try to help my brothers, help my family. So even though Long is the older of the two twins, I get that feeling of the self-sacrifice to protect and take care of the people you love. So those are the two that I kind of connect with. Yeah.
We have a question here from Shahan. So I do become worried with Genesis, as despite the cheat costs, we do see decks with single cards being 7 ofs, 8 ofs, or higher. A single card being 20% of a deck composition isn't normal, but also it's not as outlandish as it probably should be. No need for specific, but is that something the judge has their eyes on with respect to future mechanics and design, etc.? I'd like to give my own little opinion before you go into the design team's thoughts. I do see down the line that there probably will be a format where there is a limited amount of cards.
Okay.
But in these early stages, I don't think there is enough card pool to make enough variants of decks.
Yeah.
If you were to put a card limit down on it.
Yeah. I actually think that the game will become more homogenized in that way. Because the decks that I see where someone ends up breaking the mold and doing something really ridiculous, it's because they're trying to take advantage of the number of copies of a given card. And I love going back to the Reino Decay, because all things said and done, it did so much to push the game forward, because it was they took advantage of the no limitation. They pushed Epiphany. They pushed dedicated studies to the limit, and ended up creating a deck that was really, really powerful. So, in if we had that limitation of 4 copies of a card, it definitely would have been a challenge. And then the other side of it is, when you're coming from a collectible card game perspective, I don't disagree with what you're saying. It seems like that. Breaking the mold of the 4 ofs, the 3 ofs, or doing what's Yu-Gi-Oh system? They have the bands unlimited list, something like that.
Yeah, they have bands, limited, semi-limited.
So when it comes to that concept, it's just been the status quo for a very, very long time. And for a lot of people who don't know, when Magic first launched, they didn't have that, right? Richard Garfield's original concept of Magic, he didn't have that limitation. It was when a bunch of people started coming in with decks where they were running like 8 or 10 or 12 copies of Black Lotus, and he was saying, oh, I didn't see that coming. Then they put that limitation. But the key point in there is the fact that he didn't see it coming. He didn't plan for it. With our perspective, or at least my concept, I come from also a wargaming background, where I played Warhammer for a long time, 40k, not super long, but about 4 or 5 years. And I played Tyranids. And I loved having 1 week an army where I was running, 30 or 50 or 100 Gaunts. And the next week coming in and running just 3 Tyrants and having just like the bare minimum of each other model. And that swing of being able to do really crazy things allowed for a lot more design space as a army builder. So I don't know what competitive Warhammer looks like, and I'm sure there is a standardization of what the top tier is, because in any competitive game there is this idea of the top tier. But at the same time, there was still a lot of room for variance. There was a lot of room for being creative and being attached to particular models. So wanting to run more of them, even though they weren't great. If you ran enough of them and you ran them well, you could be really good with them. So an example of something like that in Genesis is Burk Naga. If you're only running 2 or 3 Burk Nagas or 4 of them in your deck, they're not that great. But when you start swarming your opponent with 16 of them, oh boy, they are challenging. So I think this format also allows us to give some space to cards who normally wouldn't be good to accelerate and become really good. And then as for the card pool, this also allows us, from a business perspective, which is very different. It allows us to have smaller sets, which means that we pay less for artists, which means that we can actually run the company. Artists aren't cheap. And they shouldn't be. Look at the artwork quality. Like they're just amazing in everything they do. So we pay them as best as we can. But it also puts a strain on how much we can put out. We're only releasing 1 set a year, and even then it pushes us to the limits in a lot of ways. So we want to make sure that whatever we deliver, we're delivering quality. So
That's fair. Shahan said, I'd like to see the Chi system realized and not a separate card limit. I don't know fully what he means, so if you could explain more, Shahan, in the chat would be great. But my perception of it is rather than saying the deck has to be 50 cards, it just says the deck has 250 Chi. So you could, in theory, have a really small deck of a lot of 8 Chis and then get wrecked by upcoming energy
Yeah.
upcoming fatigue. I think that, well, I need more explanation, I think, from Shahan there. Steve brought up a very interesting point that I never really thought about. 7 of 8 ofs is normal in Genesis, in my opinion, especially since Dex itself is a resource that you burn through, like Aura and HP. You limit your deck to 4 cards or less, you could lose all those cards in a single energy cost of something like Revenge of the Phoenix.
Yep, yep. I remember. So when the game was in its really, really early stages, and I'm talking about so early that there were maybe one or two angels in all rotation, like across all players. The people who had them, every time they played dedicated studies or bold shot or any of those cards that cost energy, and they burned their angel, they hated it. They hated it so much that they were on the border or the cusp of like, do I even start keep on playing? Like it hurt them so emotionally, and that's a whole other spectrum of why I think energy works so well in the game is because the cost there isn't an actual cost; it's an emotional cost. And once you start getting emotionally involved with what cards you're burning, that's when you start making mistakes when it comes to energy. At least with the old stuff. With the newer Future League stuff, I think there is a real cost to energy. Anyways, um, if we did have those limitations, and then people had to make more diversity in their deck, your deck is going to become really or insanely inconsistent because you're going to be putting cards into your discard pile through energy, and then to counteract that emotional feel of it, we would have to put in a lot more cards like Necrolich, which can get you cards out of your discard. And then I think we end up losing some of the uniqueness of the game, where the game doesn't feel like other collectible card games, because that theme of discarding things and pulling things back from your discard is prevalent in almost every other collectible card game that I know of. Maybe not Pokemon, but I know like most games use a mechanic like that, and we're trying to say to you is what's gone is gone, unless you're playing Necrolich. I regret making Necrolich.
No, Necrolich is fine. I'm glad. I personally am happy that Steve-O made Necrolich because I know that you guys wouldn't. So it brings the boundary that you wouldn't have designed. It brings that different level.
And it does also show that we're more willing to bend the rules of what is and is not printable in the game for the person who wins the championship. So if you win the championship and you're making a card with the game design team, we're going to give you a lot more leniency than the game design team itself would have when it comes to making cards. So, thus, win the championship. What's this thing from Steve? Being able to get the cards you need for your strategy reliably feels better than dealing with the forced randomness due to a low copy cap. And then the other side to it, which is kind of leaning into what Steve's saying there, is I remember early design process for Genesis. It was a lot about matching flavor to mechanic. And one of the conversations I always had with the team was, in the game, if you play left hook, right, and you just punch your opponent with your, I guess, left hook, if you just punch your opponent, then next turn you don't have any more left hooks in your hand, but you need one to punch let's say a cub or a cat or whatever 2-1 your opponent has on the board, then you can't do it again. And it doesn't make sense because in our world, once you know something, and you can do it again. So allowing you to run more copies of the card kind of gives you that feel that you always have at your fingertips those ideas or those concepts that you do use a lot. So if you're a very heavy bolt shot person, then and you play against someone, your opponent's gonna know you probably have a bolt shot in your hand at any given moment. How do I play around that? Yeah, and you also don't want to become predictable. That's the big thing. I remember early days playing against Alex. I can almost guarantee at any moment he has a Chrono Walker in his hand. So how do I play around that? So I like that predictability. I don't know how other people feel about that.
That's true. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, if you got another
one
question,
thing I wanted to say about I wanted to talk about the cost because just a personal opinion. Because I agree that people get emotional about the cards they flip off the deck. That's why I personally, when I flip the cards off the deck, I don't even care about them. I try to ignore it as much as
Yeah.
possible because it's irrelevant to what's going to happen on board. Unless I'm playing Necrolich, that's the only time I care about what's being flipped off the top.
Yeah. Actually, so one thing my brother did. So this was really early in those days, like I was saying, where there's so few bolt shots or purifying waves or angels or anything like that. And my brother and his best friend used to play a lot of Genesis, and one of the things that they did was whenever someone paid an energy cost, then the opponent would force them to reveal those cards on the table one at a time, so that they'd have to dig into that emotional pain. But also, as the opponent, you can now keep track of what's being discarded. So it was really interesting watching them play because it cuts deep at times. Where like you play something simple like a dedicated studies and you burn, your bolt shot and your angel, but then you draw 2 pressure points and you're like, oh, this really hurts. So yeah.
There's a third point on Shahan here. I don't know if he edited it and added it on or I missed it before. He says he gave an example of a anti duplicate thing as an example card that in some way punishes duplicate. Deal 3 damage to a summon in 4 rareness, and each summon with the same name. I personally would love to see that type of stuff.
Yeah. I have been thinking about that. I remember there was this one card that I was planning to bring into the game, or bring into Future League at least, which is called Lobotomy, where target player discards a card at random, then you look through their deck for up to 5 more copies of that card and discard those as well. So that way it can really hit players that run a lot of copies of the same card. I've been thinking about that and playing around with it. And I know Overpower, which was a big influence for my game design perspective, because that's one of the games I played the most in my life. They had a rule in there which was discard duplicates. So at the beginning of each round, players would draw 8 or 7 cards, and then you had to discard duplicates for that round. And then the round ended once both players had no more cards in hand, and then you would draw your next hand. So it was a lot easier to keep track of duplicates. But as punishing players, that's what I'd rather go into. Cards that allow us to punish players for abusing the rules compared to changing the rules based on players that abuse it. I just think there's more space. It's the same thing, it's the same conversation we were having with spot removal. There's so much ways to like heal, just say your big baddie creature, be it an angel or a lightless or a Yamaraja, whatever your big bad creature is. There's so many ways to heal it. And I could see the response of let's put in spot removal to just kill those creatures. And in some ways, I get one side of the conversation. The other side of the conversation that I'm not a huge fan of is I feel like it then punishes people who invest into creatures. And that's a big reason why in Magic, enchantment cards don't tend to work. The enchant auras, because you enchant your creature, and unless that aura card is really, really good, you're not going to play it, because you enchant that creature, the creature dies, you've now lost 2 cards. So spot removal is kind of weird for me, and I'm very much on the fence, but I'd like to find other ways to make cards that can go back and forth with people who play big monsters and have it feel more organic, have it feel like it's less punishing. So that's my perspective on these type of things. Is let's see if we can be creative from a design perspective, like card design perspective, compared to just changing the rules the way into something that we know works. Let's see if we can take what we currently have and make it work better.
He did clarify. To clarify, I don't want to see limits of 4s of by external thing game rules. What I'd like to see is players being given other reasons to diversify threats and responses. The example I gave Bob is spell deal damage to reflect the damage. So I think he's agreeing with what you just said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this was actually
like to see more.
This was actually one of my big reasons of not initially wanting a sideboard in the game, because if there isn't a sideboard, now you have to build into your deck, your 50 cards, a way to stay with your core of what your win condition is, and then also have some other cards in your deck that can help deal with what your weak points are. So if you're playing, just say, a Rain OTK, or you're playing a Rain OTK, the core of your deck is to deal as much damage as quickly as possible. So you have your draw, you have your damaging cards, you have your strategy of boosting your damage. But then you might have to run some cards on the auxiliary, which are, what if I get myself into this bind? What if I get myself into that bind? But now putting in a sideboard or the forethoughts or whatever, it now makes it that you can have your deck, your initial deck, with its core concept, and 100% of it can work towards that that purpose. And then if that purpose doesn't work, then you can swap cards in with your sideboard to make your deck a little bit more stable for your next match. It now will homogenize, I think, the main decks, but it will create some diversity in another perspective. So there's wins and losses to everything. So we got to balance, and that's why we got to test them out to see, do we like them, and does this make sense? And so, but yeah, I think that kind of, we're already an hour in, so I think we should probably wrap this up. Thank you, Alex, so much for emceeing and like helping things out as I sat here by myself. Otherwise, there'd be a lot of awkward ums and ahs. So thank you, Alex, so much.
You're welcome.
Do you have one last question that you want to kind of wrap things up with?
I do. I don't think it wraps things up, but it's another random question.
All right.
It happened. It was it was about the affiliation swap. So we've now had 4 champions that changed affiliations.
Yes.
Does that mean like the core identity of, let's just say, Nubia could have an affiliation swap at some time in their life if something happened to them?
Yes. Yeah. So there's a few things that happen here. The affiliation swaps are actually, the champion is born and raised in one location, but its conduit is coming from another location, and it ends up getting the affiliations of where its conduit came from. So Kor, who's originally from Vishud, ends up being resurrected by magics from Sahas, and now Kor is a part of the Sahas affiliations. So I think the conduit very much plays into what your magical acuity is, what your philosophies are. It becomes a driving factor, and I think of it kind of like a symbiotic relationship, more like a Venom Eddie Brock kind of relationship. So your conduit is definitely going to pull you in a particular direction, but at the same time, like, when we print these champions, so the original 8, those are printed at the beginning of Welcome to Jae'Lara. And the next 4 are at the moment of Raze, at the beginning of the Raze story arc. So when we were, for people who don't know, a bit of a spoiler here, but there is Origins, which takes place in the north. After that, there's Return, which also takes place in the north. And then there's Invasion, where the north and the south collide. And at that point, we're going to revisit these characters. They won't be reprinted because I don't like the idea of having multiple copies of the same champion. So I will never create 2 different copies of Long that will appear playable. Unless they're from different worlds, but that's a whole other issue itself. So Long is Long is Long. There's just one copy of that champion. But as the worlds evolve and people evolve, the boundaries between affiliations and stuff like that might change. So we might meet a future Nubia who might be less Axon-y and more Thymos-y. It won't be a playable version, but in the story you'll see her. So I want to see these characters grow and evolve, and you'll just have to follow the codex to see how that kind of looks. But I have some pretty big story arcs planned out for a lot of these characters. And it's definitely going to be interesting, especially when we get back to Invasion and you see these original 12 champions and how they've changed in those years. So yeah, that's definitely a thing.
exciting stuff. Exciting stuff.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to transition here into our outro screen. Thank you, everyone who's joined us. Thank you to Shahan, Andrew, Steven for throwing out a lot of questions in the chat. I really appreciate that. Thank you again to Alex for helping host things and making the entire experience a little less awkward. We do have new chapter of Akashic Codex is coming out on Monday. Tuesday night show. We're probably gonna be recapping the tournament from this Saturday, aren't we?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
then we have the tournament that's happening tomorrow. If you're participating, good luck. If you're just watching, it's gonna be fun. We have a special guest coming to do the commentary with me, so that's gonna be really great. We had a new pack opening today where we did hit that epic, so go check out YouTube and leave a comment on that video for your chance to win pool number 7. COVID reminders. I mean, Alex, what would you want to say to people who visit your store? Don't visit the store.
Don't visit the store unless you've been called to pick up your order.
Yes. Stay at home. And then February 1st is our town hall. I have a good list of questions that I have for people. So if you can come, give us feedback, and I'll be throwing out a lot of great questions to kind of dig into the philosophy of the game a little bit more from the player perspective. Otherwise, I hope to see everyone tonight at 7 p.m. on Tabletop Simulator, play testing with some of the Future League stuff, and getting ready for the tournament. All right, that's it for today. Talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye, guys.